Daf Yomi, Tractate Menachot, 69b, almost top of the page. We were talking about a very interesting case. Very, very interesting case. And I have a feeling that this can have a lot of implications in the future. So I'll start from basically the last line. I'll just read the English to get the context. There's a dilemma was raised with regard to a case where an elephant swallowed an Egyptian wicker basket. I don't know if Egyptian really matters. Let's just say a wicker basket, and it excreted it intact, along with its waste. So you can imagine an elephant swallowing a wicker basket, if that's even possible. I don't see how that's physically possible, but okay, let's just say it did. And let's just say it was kind of maybe soft, so kind of like folded in, it was kind of like, and it excreted it out with its waste. And we know that waste cannot be receiving tuma, ritual impurity. You would think that waste is the most nasty thing, but it's the most impure thing. But actually, the opposite. It does not. What they call makabel tuma, doesn't receive impurity. So here's the situation: an elephant that swallowed an elephant wicker basket and excreted it intact with its waste. What's the halacha? The Gemara asks, with regard to what matter was the dilemma raised? If we say that the dilemma was raised with regard to a case where the wicker basket was ritually impure, and the question is if its ritual impurity is nullified by the elephant swallowing it, that if you're thinking that's where we're going, we already learned in the mission, Kalim 25:9, that all vessels descend into their state of ritual impurity by means of thought. Although an unfinished vessel cannot become ritually impure, if the craftsman decided not to finish it, it immediately assumes halakhic status of a completed vessel and can become ritually impure. But they ascend from their state of ritual impurity only by means of a change resulting from an action. A ritually impure vessel, once it undergoes physical change, is no longer ritually impure. Therefore, as the wicker basket remained intact without a physical change, it is clear that it remains ritually impure. If it was changed, I guess. That's debatable because it is changed. It's absorbing this poop. It is changing a little bit. But whatever, according to the Talmud, it's not changing. Whatever. The Gemara says no, it's necessary. This dilemma is in a case where the elephant had swallowed ends of palm leaves whole, and after the leaves were excreted, one made them into an Egyptian wicker basket. I don't know why it has to be Egyptian, but okay, that was what they chose. So the dilemma is as follows: is this considered digestion, and therefore the basket prepared from the leaves is like dung vessels and like earth vessels, which do not mean makabel tuva, ain makabel and tuva. We have now turned to the top of 69b, our amud for today. The amud for now, actually, it's not today's daf is whatever. Okay, 69b, Menachot 69b. Kechlei gelalim kechlei adama v'mekabelin tuma adama kechlei avanim v'kechlei gelalim v'kechlei adama v'mekabelin tuma lo midim v'toyra lo midim v'soifrim or midim lo have equal like dung vessels. So we're looking at the elephant that swallows just the palm leaves and then excretes them intact, and then the idea is, can you make the advantage to that is it considered dung? And if it's dung, then it will be tumor proof. So there's an advantage in doing that. So that's what we want to know. Like dung vessels, and these are not susceptible to ritual impurity, as the master said. Stone vessels and dung vessels and earth vessels are not susceptible to ritual impurity, neither by Torah law nor by rabbinic law. Or perhaps this is not considered digestion, as these palm leaves remained intact. Therefore, the vessel prepared from them is susceptible to ritual impurity like any other wooden vessel. The Gemara suggests Tipshot le mihad yamaru la mishum Rabbi Shimon bar Yehud Tzadak מעשה ובעלו זאבים שני תינוקוס בעבר הירדן ובו מעשה לפני חכמים ותהרוס הבשר. Okay, this is interesting. Hard to imagine that it happened, but okay, let's just say it did. The Gemara suggests resolve the dilemma from that which Ula says in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yotzadok. An incident occurred in which wolves swallowed two children. Okay, imagine a wolf swallowing two children. Can you imagine what a horrific sight that must have been for the child to be swallowed by a wolf, going inside its stomach with those digestive acids? How did they remain intact? I don't know. But let's hear this. The wolf swallowed two children and excreted them on the east bank of the Jordan. And the incident came before the sages for a ruling. They were asked whether the remains of the children, they weren't alive. They were swallowed, but they weren't chewed up. But they were obviously probably suffocated in there, not to mention the digestive juices, So they were asked whether the remains of the children were ritually impure, even after they had passed through the animal's digestive tract, and they deemed the flesh ritually pure, as is no longer considered human flesh, but wolf excrement. Similarly, the swallowed palm leaves should be considered like elephant dung, and therefore the basket made from them should not be susceptible to ritual impurity, and the Gemara rejects this resolution. Shani basar darkich v'divshot misefa v'timus atzamos shani atzamos deakoshitve. The Gemara rejects this resolution. That case of flesh is different, as flesh is soft and digestible. Palm leaves, by contrast, are hard and not easily digested. The Gemara suggests, but in that case, let us resolve the dilemma from the last clause of the account of that incident. The sages ruled that the flesh was ritually pure, but they deemed the intact bones ritually impure. The bones, which are a harder substance than the flesh, are not considered digested. Likewise, the hard palm leaves should also not be considered digested, and the wicker basket fashioned from them should be susceptible to ritual impurity. The Gemara answers, the case of bones is different, as they are harder. Therefore, one cannot cite a proof from here with regard to palm leaves, which are comparatively softer substance. Boy Rabbi Zero, Chitin shol b'ol lemay, ina menachos amayla, ela shtil lechem lemay. Rabbi Zero raises a dilemma with regard to wheat that fell from the clouds. What does that mean? Wheat that fell from the clouds, is that some kind of metaphor? Wheat that fell from the clouds, is that manna? I'm not sure what this means. But anyway, Rabbi Zeir raises with regard to wheat that fell from the clouds. What is the halacha? The Gemara asks, with regard to what issue was this dilemma raised? If it is referring to using this wheat for meal offerings, why not? There should be no problem with using the wheat, since wheat for meal offerings does not have to come from Eretz Yisrael. Rather, the dilemma is whether this wheat can be used for the offering of the 2 loaves in Shavuot. What is the halacha? ממושבותיכם, רחמן אליו פרקי לחוץ לארץ דלה, אבל לאהוב משבר דומי. וידין מה ממושבותיכם דווקא, ואפילו לאהוב מן המילה. The Gemara explains the 2 possibilities. The verse states, you shall bring out of your dwellings 2 wave loaves of 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven for first fruits to the Lord, Leviticus 23:17. When the Merciful One states, out of your dwellings, does it serve to exclude wheat that came from outside Eretz Yisrael? teaching that it may not be used for the 2 loaves, but wheat that fell from the clouds is permitted? Or perhaps the verse means specifically out of your dwellings, meaning only in Eretz Yisrael, only from Eretz Yisrael. If so, even wheat that fell from the clouds is also not acceptable. What does he mean by wheat falling from the clouds? What is he talking about? Chitin sheyardu ba'avim. Is he saying, like, theoretically, if wheat were to fall from the clouds? That's like pure fantasy. What if wheat appeared out of thin air, just materialized on the table here? I mean, there's all these kind of questions. Chitin sheyardu ba'avim. That's a good question. I looked at 731. Ephraim and Menachot. No. Is it Reuven and Shimon? I think it's Reuven and Shimon. Chitin sheyardu ba'avim ma'hu l'mayim. Ma'hu l'mayim l'malachos l'mayla. Ela she'elechem l'mayim. Or is there... did we read it? Oh, I think we read this already. Okay. Let's read it again. Okay, Rabbi Zer raises a dilemma. With regard to wheat that fell from the clouds, the Gemara says, with regard to what issue is raised, is referring to wheat for meal offerings. Why not? There should be no problem with using the wheat, since the wheat for meal offerings does not have to come from Eretz Yisrael. Rather, the dilemma is whether this wheat can be used for the offering of the 2 loaves on Shavuot. What's the halacha? Mimoshvotechem. Amar Rachmana Pogid Chuzes Israel Delo Avodam Shabadami. The Gemara explains the 2 possibilities. The verse states, "You shall bring out of your dwellings 2 wave loaves of 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven, the first fruits to the Lord." Leviticus 23:17. When the Merciful One states out of your dwellings, does this serve to exclude wheat that came outside Eretz Yisrael, teaching that it may not be used for the 2 loaves, but wheat that fell from the clouds is permitted? Or perhaps the verse means specifically out of your dwellings, meaning only from Eretz Yisrael, and if so, even wheat that fell from the clouds is also not acceptable. Umiika ki hagavna in kidaritayo nichisole rom kizbachiti b'silosa parsi. Whoa, this is amazing. With regard to this dilemma, the Gemara asks, but is there a case like this? Is it possible for wheat to fall from the clouds? That's what I was asking before. Is it possible? You're fantasizing. You're making stuff up. The Gemara answers yes. As a matter of fact, there is a case where wheat can fall from the clouds. Yes, as in an incident involving Adi the Arab. Yeah. Remember Adi the Arab? Adi the Arab? Adi-do? Yes, as in an incident involving Adi the Arab, about whom it is related that it rained down on him wheat of a height of 1 handbreadth, spread over an area of 3 parsot. Wheat in the height of 1 handbreadth, 1 tefach, or an area of 3 parsot. That's interesting. Boy Rav Shimon ben Pazi, Shiboiles, Shevio Shlish, Koidim Noimer, Bekarus Los Achaloimer, Sofer Mahu, Pasekazinem Shai Oimer, Oidil, Mabasol, Sevezinan Chiavo, Oimer Abo. Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi raises a dilemma. In a case where one had an ear of grain that reached 1/3 of its growth, prior to the bringing of the Omer offering, and then he uprooted it and planted it again after the Omer, and then it added to its growth. What is the halacha? Do we follow the original growth which was permitted by the Omer offering, and therefore the additional growth is also permitted? Or perhaps we follow the additional growth which was not permitted by the Omer as it grew afterward, and if so, it will remain prohibited until the next Omer offering is brought. The Gemara suggests resolve the dilemma from that which Rabbi Bahu says, that Rabbi Yochanan says, with regard to a young vine within 3 years of its planting, whose fruits are prohibited as orla, that one grafted onto an old permitted vine, and there were fruits on the younger vine, even if the older vine added 200 parts of growth to the existing fruit, it is still prohibited. The 200 permitted parts, which are generally sufficient to nullify one part of orla, are ineffective in this case because the subsequent additional growth is considered subordinate to the original prohibited growth. This proves that we follow the original growth, and therefore Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi's case, in his case, the original growth that was permitted by the Omer should render the entire plant, including the subsequent growth, permitted in consumption. The Gemara cites another proof from a similar case, and likewise, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani says that Rabbi Yonatan says, with regard to an onion that when planted in a vineyard, creating a forbidden mixture of food crops in a vineyard, and the vineyard was subsequently uprooted, so that most of the onion grew in a permitted manner. Even if the onion added 200 parts of growth, the onion is prohibited. The reason the entire onion is prohibited is apparently because we follow the original growth, which is forbidden. Hagufek kami boile mifshat pshit elu larabonon debasli kazinon lo yishna lekula v'lo yishna lechumra oidin ma spokim sapkelahu ulechumra amrinan lekula lo amrinan tegu. This might be the 148th tegu, looks like, in Babylonian tongue. The Gemara states that these proofs are inconclusive, and that itself is what Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi raises in a dilemma. Is it entirely obvious to the sages that we follow the main growth, and there is no difference whether this leads to leniency or whether it leads to stringency? Or perhaps, they are uncertain about the matter, and therefore they rule that when it leads to stringency, for example, prohibiting the additional growth of orla fruit or the additional growth of an onion that had grown in a vineyard, we say that we follow the original growth. But when it leads to leniency, such as allowing the consumption of grain after the Omer, we do not say that we follow the original growth. The Gemara concludes, Teku, we must wait for Elijah the prophet at the advent of the coming of the Messiah, son of David, which hopefully will be soon in our day. Boy rabo le'inyin maser mai. In connection to the previous discussion, with regard to an ear of grain that had 1/3 prior to the Omer, and was subsequently uprooted and replanted, Rabbi raises a dilemma with regard to the obligation to tithe. What is the halacha of such a grain? The Gemara answers, what are the circumstances? Circumstances of a case where, to be continued.